Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, March 1st, 2010. We are here at our official board meeting. It's about 7:30, actually about 7:40 p.m. If we could all stand and rise to do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to make this meeting official, I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Pezza.
Here.
Shea.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Nybo.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. We have an official quorum. And at this time, I'd open up to our public forum portion of the meeting, item number 3. Item number 2, written communications and petitions from the public. If there is anyone that has any written communications and or petitions from the public, if you would please rise and present those to our city clerk at this time. Anybody with written communications and or petitions from the public? All righty. Seeing none, I will now go to our third item on the agenda, which is our public forum. Public forum is an opportunity for people from Elmhurst to speak about any issue regarding the city, any concern you may have. I would ask that as I call on you, if you would please raise your hand, I'll call on you and take the microphone either to my right or to my left, and please state your name, your address, and then you have 3 minutes. Anybody at this time that would like to speak for public forum? Anybody? Public forum? This gentleman here?
Thomas Castillo. I just wanted to point out to the board that recently we had the elections. By my polling place at about 2:30 in the afternoon, all of the political signage were down. I understand we have a city ordinance of no political campaign signs on public property, and the city has a right to take this down. But what I'm referring to is the schoolhouse over on Van Uken. All those signs were taken down there, and I think if we continue to do this, I know it happened the last election cycle as well. It's just a matter of time before something winds up happening to the city as far as a candidate possibly suing or a party suing the city.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Anyone else for a public forum at this time? Anyone else for public forum? Seeing none, I will close the public forum portion of our meeting and go on to the consent agenda, which is item number 4. At this time, I would ask if anybody has any item they might want to remove from the consent agenda, possibly vote no on or have a question on. At this time, if you please indicate which item it might be. Anybody would like to? Alderman Wagner?
Item P.
Item P, okay. Very good. Any other item? Question, vote no, or Alderman Morley?
L and M.
L and M. Okay. Anybody else? Hearing no other items, I will ask for a motion and a second to vote put a motion on the floor to approve the contents of the consent agenda, less items L, M, and P. Ask for a motion, Alderman Hipskin, Alderman Gutenkopf with a second, and I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Hipskin.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner.
Aye.
14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays. The motion to approve the consent agenda, less items L, M, and P is approved unanimously. And at this time, I'll move on to item number L, or letter L, I should say, which is a report. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to read the report, please.
Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council approve this request. The City Attorney is hereby directed to prepare an ordinance authorizing the zoning ordinance text amendment increasing the FAR in the I-1 district from .50 to .65. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, signed by Stephen Morley, Chair, Susan J. Rose, Vice Chair, Norman Leader, Alderman, 2nd Ward.
All righty, and at this time, I'd ask for a motion and a second to put this report on the floor, please. Alderman Rose with the motion and a second by Alderman Leader, and discussion. Alderman Rose, or Alderman Worley, I should say.
Well, no, go ahead if you want to.
This is a report that was generated from our zoning administrator, and it's fairly simple and straightforward, and we would encourage you to support this. It really will allow for greater business development in the industrial park.
Alderman Worley with discussion.
Yes, my name on here is on here in error. I actually did not participate in this discussion when it came before the committee. I recused myself from the discussion, and Alderman Rose handled it. I own property in an I-1 district in Elmhurst that potentially could be affected by this, and to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I'm recusing myself from the discussion and the vote.
Very good, Alderman Morley. Any other discussion on this particular item at this time? Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Rose.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Morley.
Abstain.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner.
Aye.
13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 abstention.
All righty, 13 ayes, 0 nays, 1 abstention. That motion, that report does pass. On to item letter F, M as in Mary. There's another report. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to read the report, please, for item number M as in Mary.
Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council approve this request. The City Attorney is hereby directed to prepare an ordinance authorizing a conditional use permit for the requested pylon sign. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, signed by Stephen Morley, Chair, Susan J. Rose, Vice Chair, Norman Leader, Alderman, 2nd Ward.
And I ask for a motion and a second to put this report on the floor, please.
Point of order, I need to pull this back to committee.
Okay.
The application in reference is actually, there's an incomplete part that was to be completed by this point, but it's not, so we're just going to pull it back.
Okay.
And you'll see it again in 2 weeks.
Very good. So we're pulling it back to committee. Pulled by Alderman Morley. All righty. And on to item number, letter P, which is an ordinance. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to read the ordinance, please. And letter P.
Okay, this is an MCO 10-2010, an ordinance regulating pedicabs within the city of Elmhurst.
Okay. And Alderman Wagner just informed me this was another pullback, and that's why he had it pulled off, so we will,
Correct, that's right. Just going, referring it back to committee.
we're going to refer
Okay.
this back to committee as well, too, so.
All right.
So we'll pull that back to Public Affairs and Safety. And on to committee reports, which is section 5 of our meeting here. Letter A, report on a vacation request, and I ask Clerk Spencer, actually, we're going to pull this item as well, so I don't even know if we need to read this. We'll go ahead and pull this back to committee as well. There you go. Alderman Kennedy, request that it gets pulled back. And on to letter P, letter B as in boy, which is another report on motor fuel tax, and I believe this is getting pulled back by Alderman York. Is that the case?
That's correct.
We're doing a lot of pullbacks tonight, folks. We're double checking some things in committee on a lot of these items, so.
Right. And the reason that I've asked that this be pulled back, and I see Alderman Shea has presented us with a really nice report, and I'm sorry that you took your time to do this, but I had an impromptu meeting with a 4th Ward constituent and business owner on Saturday that got me to thinking that being this close to seeing the budget that we're going to see tonight prepared by city staff and all the work that's gone on in here, I feel like it's an appropriate time to pull it back and go through work that we need to go through as a city council to kind of do some of the heavy lifting on this budget, see what kind of judicious cuts we can make, and then reevaluate the motor fuel tax at an appropriate time after the budget work is completed here. I understand completely that $250,000 that this tax would possibly generate in this environment appears to be of great need at this point in time. But I think, again, being so close, we were going to enact this in May. We wouldn't see the first revenue trickle in on a monthly basis. It'd be about $21,000 if our projections are correct. We wouldn't see that until the end of June. And at this point in time, I don't see the harm in putting it off for a month or two until we're able to fully understand the breadth and scope of the budget before us, and then base our actions on that discovery. So,
Very good, so we'll go ahead and pull
Point
it.
of order. If I may ask the city attorney, I mean, this has already been pulled back to committee once before. Can we continually pull back to committee?
You know, as I recall your rules in your chapter 2, I don't think there's a prohibition
no
in
limit.
there that I can recall that would prohibit it.
Thank you.
and I want to make it clear that we're pulling this back until the time that we get done with budget. So it's not going to come back on and come back off again. We're pretty satisfied to bring it off and see what happens and then reintroduce it as needed.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. And to item letter C, which is a report on Han Street. Ask Clerk Spencer to read the report on item C. 5C.
Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council authorize the City Attorney to proceed with negotiations to amend and restate the development agreement between the City of Elmhurst and Morningside Han, LLC. Further, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council authorize the Zoning and Planning Commission to process an amended request from Morningside Han, LLC as applicant for preliminary combined residential and business plan development conditional use. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, signed by Stephen Morley, Chair, Susan J. Rose, Vice Chair, and Norman Leader, Alderman, 2nd Ward.
And at this time, I ask for entertain a motion and a second to put this item on the floor, please. Alderman Morley with the motion, Alderman Rose with the second, and discussion. Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think most of the folks up at the dais were at our last DP&Z meeting. But just to set the record for everyone, I think most people are familiar with the Han Street proposal and with Morningside. We had, and the reason why it was brought before the committee and why it's coming out of the committee with this report, we had pending before our committee a request for a preliminary plan development conditional use from the applicant. In fact, it was co-applicant Morningside and the city. And that was a pending issue before the committee. Prior to the committee making a formal recommendation on that request, we received a letter from the attorney representing Mr. Strasburg and Morningside requesting a change in the development agreement. And there's many extenuating circumstances that are highlighted in this attorney's letter, but the long and the short of it is that due to unforeseen economic circumstances, there's the developers requesting their ability to attempt to change the plan. So basically, what this report does is this is doing two things. Well, let me back up a little bit. We really have two choices here as it relates to the Han Street development. We can reject the developer's request for an amendment or a change to the development agreement. In doing so, basically what we would do is try to move forward with the current plan that was previously voted on and approved. However, it's pretty clear from the letter that we received that the developer really won't be in a position to move forward with that. So in effect, the development would die. Our other option that we had is to allow the developer to try to come up with a different plan, and he gave us a rough sketch last Monday night to come up with a different plan, one that is a little more feasible in today's economic climate. So that's really what this report is asking for. This report's asking for two things. One, it's to allow the city staff and the city attorney to open up negotiation to, in effect, reopen the development agreement to try to come to an accommodation for a new agreement. Two, there's a little bit of housekeeping here in that, and Clerk Spencer read the last paragraph. Furthermore, it's the recommendation of the DP&Z that the City Council authorize Zoning and Planning Commission to process the amended request. Simply what that is that is removing the obligation that's in front of the committee right now. Right now we have a pending application in front of us, and in effect, by approving this report, what we as a committee are recommending and what we as a council are doing is taking their application and pushing it back to the Zoning and Planning Commission. Otherwise, it would be a piece of unfinished business. So if we are going to allow the developer the ability to attempt to change things, I want to be clear on this. We're making no commitment that we accept what the developer has proposed. We saw, I'd call it a thumbnail sketch of what the developer wants to do, possibly break this into two different phases, if you will. Anyway, for us to allow this process to move forward, we need to do two things. We need to open up the development agreement, which is recommended in here, and two, we need to take the application that's pending before us and send it back to the commission. So those are the two things this report discusses. Those are the two things that this committee and this report recommends.
Very good. Any other discussion? Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. Just a couple of points of clarity. Thank you, Alderman Morley, also. I just want to be absolutely positive, because to me the process is just as important as the project, that when this goes back before the zoning commission, that it will be basically the whole regular process where the surrounding within 500 feet residents get notified, and nothing will be different. It will be the normal zoning commission process. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? All righty. Hearing no other discussion, I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Morley.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Pullinger. Wagner. 14 ayes, 0 nays.
14 ayes, 0 nays. That report passes and goes off to the commission. And on to item D, which is a report. I'd ask Clerk Spencer to, regarding bank uses, to read the report, please.
Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the text of the zoning ordinance relating to bank uses remain in its current form. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee. Signed by Stephen Morley, Chair, and Susan J. Rose, Vice Chair.
And at this time, I ask for a motion and a second to put this on the floor, please. Alderman Morley with the motion and a second. Alderman Rose with the second, and discussion. Alderman Morley?
I'll defer to Alderman Leader or to the chair.
Okay.
Okay.
I would
Do it
like,
that way?
as a point of order, to substitute the minority report for the majority report.
Okay, so we have a motion by Alderman Leader to substitute the minority report for the majority report. Do we have a second on that?
Want me to read the recommendation?
Pardon me?
Did you want me to read the recommendation?
Oh, absolutely.
For the minority
Should I get the
report?
second first, or should I?
I think the second, and then
Okay. Alderman Healy with the second, and Clerk Spencer, if you could please read the minority report, please, for us.
Therefore, it is the recommendation of the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee that the City Council authorize the Zoning and Planning Commission to hold a public hearing to amend the text of Elmhurst zoning ordinance to require that all bank uses, with or without drive-through, be conditional uses. Respectfully submitted, Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, signed by Norman Leader, Alderman, 2nd Ward.
All righty. And at this time, I'd open the item for discussion. Alderman Leader.
Essentially, at the present zoning ordinance allows banks without drive-through, and they are considered as permitted uses. So if it's without a drive-through, a bank is a permitted use in a commercial district. Banks with a drive-through are required to meet the conditional use approval from the City Council. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear at the beginning that I am not asking that we limit the number of banks, nor am I asking that we prohibit new banks. This is not, we're not asking any banks to be prohibited. We're not putting a number on any new banks. I wanted that perfectly clear before I say anything. As we all know, the retail sales tax is the most important source of revenue for the city of Elmhurst. The stunning and sudden collapse of retail sales, particularly car sales, forced us to raise the city of Elmhurst tax levy. And that was partially to close a yawning and frightening budgetary gap. Now, healthy retail sales equate to lower city property taxes. Banks do not pay retail sales taxes. To the extent that we have more banks, we have lower retail sales taxes and a higher city tax levy. There are only so many prime retail locations in downtown Elmhurst or in Elmhurst. To the extent that they are occupied by new banks or banks, to that extent do we have less retail sales establishments. Now, I'm not saying that banks cannot contribute to a healthy retail sales environment, particularly if a bank is an investor and an integral part of a larger retail development. Obviously, they can and do. I am saying that standalone banks in prime retail sales areas are an overall negative in generating new tax dollars through retail sales. And I think it's clear the last thing we want to do is raise the city tax levy again because of continually falling retail sales tax collection. Again, I'm not calling for any limits on banks, new or otherwise. And I'm not saying in any way that we should ban banks. All I'm saying is something like 90% of the banks are subject to conditional use. All I'm saying is make them all subject to conditional use and judge them on their merits. If they're good for the city, fine. And if we think that they're not, okay. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Leader. And for the record, Alderman York mentioned to me that he was going to be abstaining from this vote because of possibly a conflict of interest with the bank that his wife works for. So got a lot of people making sure that they're abstaining in different situations. So I heed that discretion. So Clerk Spencer, when we do call the roll on this, just note that will have an abstaining vote there. Any other discussion? I know Alderman Healy was the second on that. Alderman Morley, I'll go to you.
Thank you.
Sure.
This report stems from a referral from Alderman Healy regarding making banks conditional use. And as our committee considered this issue 5, maybe 6 separate times. I think ultimately we were looking for a smoking gun that we couldn't find. in relation to a problem or a situation that would give us a clear answer. We looked at the number of the banks in town, in retail locations. We specifically looked at the number of banks in the central business districts, C4 and C4A. We compared that to the total number of retail locations, total number of square footage, and I was surprised to find out that in the central business district, the bank floor area equals about 3.6%. So it's much smaller, I think, than maybe the perception. Alderman Leader already pointed out that we do have a conditional use as it relates to banks. Many of the establishments, whether they're retail or not, will not move into town if they feel that their business requires a drive-through. And obviously, we're all aware that all drive-throughs in town are conditional use. And I will read for the record the first standard of conditional use that must be met. The establishment, maintenance, or operation of the conditional use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. It's a rather broad description. However, I do believe it addresses most of the concerns that I understand we have for banks. So that's one of the things that we considered, is that roughly 75% of the banks in town are already what I would consider held to some sort of conditional use. In addition to that, actually, we voted on a bank about a year and a half ago where they wanted to erect a pylon sign, which is also conditional use. And at the time, the bank told us that without the sign, they wouldn't move in. So there's actually a couple of restrictions for banks that we considered. We looked at multiple other municipalities in the Chicagoland area. There was kind of a push a couple of years ago when the economy was booming to limit banks. Interestingly enough, when we reviewed the reasoning behind what these municipalities did, it was, the best way I can describe it, it was kind of a gut reaction or anecdotal evidence. We have too many banks, we need to do something about it. And you'll hear me, go back to that theme, because we couldn't find specific evidence of limit banks here, retail will come in. We couldn't find that. We couldn't make that correlation, and we looked at it for a good 5 or 6 months. We actually also heard from the private sector a little bit about renting banks, and in and of itself, the anecdotal evidence we received from them was that the walk-up bank, banks, let's face it, banks have a lot of issues lately, and the proliferation of the walk-up bank in retail locations by many in the banking industry is actually considered a failure. So the incidence of this happening, we think the market is actually correcting. Finally, I'll say that in this tough economy, the majority of the committee believes that really it's not the time that we're going to want to regulate out. A wise person told me you can regulate out, but you can't regulate in. As much as I want a Trader Joe's and a bookstore, and you name it, the list can go on and on. Just because I say what can't go there doesn't mean what you want to go there will, and the market's going to drive that. So ultimately, we continued to go back to this. We discussed it on numerous occasions, looking for a definitive answer. We did not. Ultimately, what I think it boiled down to is we could not find a direct correlation to banks versus retail and the guarantee that the elimination of a bank is going to guarantee a retail. So that's why I don't support, although with all due respect, I don't support Alderman Leader's minority report, and do support the majority report.
Very good. Any other discussion? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to start by saying I love banks. Banks lend me money when I don't have enough of my own to buy things. This isn't about banks. Banks in town are good corporate citizens. You look at Community Bank of Elmhurst, you look at Suburban Bank and Trust, Harris, just to name a few. They're good corporate residents of Elmhurst. Many of the employees of these banks live in town and are among some of our finest residents. So this isn't, my issue isn't with banks per se. However, I do believe that adding all banks to the conditional use status and then the resulting review process is a good thing for the city of Elmhurst. Before I go into some of my reasons, I would like to touch on some of the reasons for not doing it, some of which Alderman Morley mentioned. And I certainly respect and understand the opinion that making banks conditional use is not the right thing to do. I just disagree. One of the loudest arguments I hear, or one of the biggest reasons I hear is, well, you know, it's a free market. You know, should we be legislating banks? And aren't lights on better than lights off? I've heard that quite a bit. And I guess my argument to that would be that's kind of why we have zoning laws, so that we can control what goes where. If I were to suggest that we make restaurants conditional use, I think some may have an issue with that. Restaurants in C1 and C4 districts are already conditional use. Amusement establishments like bowling alleys, skating rinks, you know, should those be conditional use? You'd probably get arguments on both sides of the equation. Amusement establishments in C2, C3, C4 are all conditional use. Automotive service stations, conditional use in C1, C3, C4. So if we're going to have the free market argument of should we be looking at, because to Alderman Leader's point, this is not a restriction, this is not a moratorium, it's adding banks to the process, then previous councils already determined some of these other businesses like restaurants are subject to conditional use. I would suggest that banks, while you may agree or not agree that they be there, the precedent for making banks conditional use, I think, exists. Drive-throughs has already been discussed. Alderman Morley mentioned 75%, Alderman Leader mentioned 90%. I don't know what the actual percent is. Clearly, I think we'd all agree that most banks have drive-throughs, and isn't that good enough? Two points to that. I would actually use that in reverse and say if you feel we already are reviewing banks conditionally 75 or 90% of the time, what's wrong with adding that additional 10 to 25%? If we're fine with drive-throughs, then why not add the rest of them? And I can point to various locations in town that I think it would have been a good thing to have a review process over. And the first and biggest example I use would be the Wachovia, which is now Wachovia. Originally it was a World Bank, across from Kohl's. I know the development staff at the city at the time, I know the mayor at the time, Mayor Marcucci, wanted a restaurant in that location. I think I would certainly agree that a restaurant, a nice family sit-down restaurant like an Applebee's or a Chili's or some kind of fast casual establishment like that might be a better fit for that location for Elmhurst than a Wachovia Bank. Had the council at the time and by the way, Wachovia does not have a drive-through. Had the city council at the time had conditional use, city council then may have done something. I don't know. I don't know what the will of the council would have been at that time, but I know that it would have been discussed. And I know that bank eventually went in, and you know, perhaps some of the senior members of the council that were on at the time can correct me, but the developer threatened lawsuit if the city tried to hold that up. Conditional use at that time would have helped that situation. Final 2 points, or as I understand them, some of the reasoning against doing this are economy related. That the economy will take care of the problem. That we don't need to do this, we don't even need to look at it because the economy will take care of the problem. Well, I would suggest to you the Chase, the brand new Chase on St. Charles and West, and the PNC on York that's going up right now next to the Good Earth are examples of maybe the economy won't take care of the problem. And I'm not suggesting either bank is an issue, but I am suggesting that I don't think we or people should rely on the economy argument as taking care of the issue if you believe there's an issue. Second point to the economy is, and Alderman Morley mentioned it, should we be looking to do this at a time when the economy is terrible? Should we be looking to stop development when the economy is not going so well? And I would argue absolutely. I think now is absolutely the time that we need to look at doing this to make sure that when the economy turns around, and we all hope it's sooner rather than later for many reasons, that when the economy does turn around, that we have a review process in place to protect those valuable pieces of land, to Alderman Leader's point. I think we would all like big retail sales tax producing businesses in many parts of town. Well, if a bank goes up in a part of town or in a valuable piece of land, like I would suggest West and St. Charles are, that can happen when the economy does turn around. So I think when the times are tough is when you really need to make sure the processes are in place to do what you want to do. Alderman Morley mentioned it. There is no smoking gun that a restriction or even a process that inhibits banks works. There's also no smoking gun to say it doesn't. Some of what my argument rests on and Alderman Leader's argument rests on is, I hesitate to say common sense because I don't believe it's that, but if a Chase goes up on the corner of West and St. Charles, nothing else can. So does that Chase inhibit sales tax? Well, we know it doesn't create any. Is there any sales tax coming out of that location now? No. Will there be in the future? Possibly, if something else goes in there. And by the way, when the Chase went in, and when Alderman Morley mentioned the pylon sign discussion, part of Chase's sell job, if you will, was that that Chase was going to anchor additional retail. That additional retail didn't develop. And in fact, the economy is what took care of it. The additional retail space went away, and now we just have a Chase. So I don't have any arguments. I don't have any statistics to Alderman Morley's point that it works or it doesn't. So I think some of it just says if you believe that banks do generate additional retail because we have walk-up traffic, what have you, you believe it. If you don't, you don't. But the question each of us has to answer, in my opinion, is before a fifth Chase bank comes to town, before a fourth bank on York Road in a one-block stretch in the center of town, Community Bank, Kitty Corner City Bank, down the street Chase Bank, before a fourth bank on Spring Road in a two-block stretch between Eggleston and just north of Villette, you've got a Providence Bank, you've got an SBT, and you've got a Inland Bank. Or before a fourth bank on York in a two-block stretch at Villette, the new bank, the new PNC, you've got a U.S. bank and a charter bank. Before any of that stuff happens in the future, does it make sense to have a city council review process before any of that occurs? I believe it does, and I believe it is the right thing for the city of Elmhurst. So I ask for your support for Alderman Leader's minority report. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Healy. Any other discussion? Alderman Rose.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I do have a few comments to make on this. I understand this is not, I'm glad to hear that this is not kind of a rap on banks, because I'll tell you, banks are very easy to beat up on nowadays. It's kind of a simple thing to do. I would, instead of thinking about facts and figures, I would take us down a little bit of an understanding of zoning, what the purpose of zoning is, what the mechanics of zoning are, because I think that, in my mind, goes a long way towards understanding my position about why we should not regulate or add an additional regulation to banks who are already significantly regulated in this community. I asked several questions. The first is, what's the rationale for doing this? The rationale, as far as I understand it from Alderman Leader and Alderman Healy, is that somehow this would open up commercial property for development. I wouldn't even look for facts and figures. I would just look back at history. The St. Charles and 83 site, I have to tell you, was open for several years. All of us might have wanted to see something in there. The marketplace, which I think operates fairly well, we could have had a Trader Joe's there. If Trader Joe's had decided they wanted to move there, that property was for sale for several years. They could have bought it. There's no reason why they could not have bought it. I think that's kind of a key piece, which it's a fallacy to say that if we don't allow banks, we will get commercial property in there. And it's not even just stats. That our history has not shown that to be true. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The second is really an understanding of conditional use. Conditional use does not allow the city council to simply decide whether we like something or not, or whether something is a good fit or not. That is not the purpose of conditional use. Conditional use, Alderman Morley read the first criteria, which is to make sure it doesn't impact the health, welfare, et cetera. There are 7 conditions that need to be met. Primarily, they focus on, and this is why certain things have to be conditional use. A drive-in has to do with the intersection of pedestrian traffic, are there proper egress and ingress. Zoning and conditional use is primarily to do 2 things, to look at safety issues, general welfare issues, and the protection of the surrounding properties, their property values, and their uses. That's primarily what conditional use is for, not necessarily to protect a corner for commercial use, a form of, I would call it municipal protectionism. Well, let's not allow banks because someone might move in. They may or may not. I do think that that's conditional use cannot be allowed for just what we think is going to be better or not. There are a series of fairly clearly identifiable criteria that have to be met before we can do that. I think that we have to then ask ourselves, if we are willing to regulate banks, why do we not regulate all non-tax producing revenue anywhere in the city? If we say banks, then why not anybody else? Today banks, tomorrow doctors, the next day any kind of service thing, the cleaners, let's not have a cleaners. We can't get the same kind of tax from that as well. I think that there has to be a good mix in any community of that. I understand Alderman Healy's angst about this. Maybe there's too many. The decision about too many, I suppose you could go down to LaSalle Street and ask yourself in the financial district, are there too many banks there? I don't know that anyone would say that. Maybe there are not. I think that we have to apply some kind of logic based on our history, some kind of rational thinking here, instead of just wishful thinking about what would or would not go in a particular place. Chase Bank it's actually on West and St. Charles. There's still a significant amount of property that's there. Economy turns around, who knows, maybe we will get that. I have an incredible respect for the marketplace. The marketplace is not God, we control it. But the marketplace runs fairly well. And I think we ought to intrude on it very lightly and with great caution. And I think that's a principle that I would hold on to. When we do decide to intrude on the marketplace, it primarily is to protect people's health, welfare, and surrounding property values. And until I see an argument for that with banks, I have to tell you I simply could not support that. And so I would urge you to support the majority report.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other discussion? Alderman Healy.
Last comments, and I certainly respect Alderman Rose's opinions. Obviously, I disagree. I just want to read, and I've got the zoning code in front of me, and I'm going to read the list of conditional uses. I want to make sure I get it right. For C4 commercial districts. And this is a partial list. I'm going to leave some of the more obvious ones out. Ambulance service, amusement establishments, bowling alleys, pool halls, dance halls, swimming pools, skating rinks, automotive service stations, bus stations, convention exhibit halls, drive-in establishments, funeral homes, hotels and motels, laboratories, machine sales, large equipment, parking lots, parks, planned developments, restaurants, including entertainment and dancing, senior citizen housing, and transportation depots. Some of those, I think, make sense to have under conditional use. Some of those, if if the thought is that banks don't fit the use of conditional use, I can make the same argument then that several of let me rephrase that. If you're going to believe that banks don't fit the need for conditional use, then don't you also have to believe that several of those that I just read off would fall in that same category? I guess that's for each of us to decide. I feel perfectly, I think it's a good use of conditional use to include banks. It's a review process. The precedent is set with other establishments, service-related or otherwise, and I think it's worth our while. Thank you.
Alderman Rose.
I have one, I'll make one additional comment. Even my husband says I won't let him get the last word, right? I would ask us to think several things. One, requiring any business to go through the conditional use process, okay, is not without its expense. It's not simply something that you can just do. It adds an additional expense to any business. So there needs to be a rationale for it. I think we ought to consider that. The second thing I'd ask you to think forward 6 months from now. We got a bank coming in, and we passed the Leader-Healy ordinance at that point. And now we have a bank in front of us who says, I want to come in. And we, for some reason, there's too many. Perhaps it is that fifth Chase Bank that Alderman Healy talks about. And now we've got to look for, we don't really want it there, but we cannot, conditional use doesn't allow us to say, we don't want a bank there, we're not going to allow you to have that because we think there's too many. It will not allow us to say, we will not allow a conditional use there because we think that's prime real estate. That is not in our ordinance. It will not do that. And so I think if that's what we want, there are other mechanisms to do that. The city, if we think a piece of real estate is so valuable, perhaps the city ought to have the courage to simply buy it and hold it for a public-private partnership. I think using the vehicle of conditional use is simply an inappropriate way to reach a goal that perhaps Alderman Healy and Alderman Leader and I might even agree on. I simply think that this mechanism is a very poor mechanism to do that.
All righty. Any other discussion? Alderman Morley.
Really, it's more of a procedural issue. If the minority report passes, just so everybody knows, and I think we're all aware of it, but for anybody listening, if the minority report passes, it does not mean that we're actually going to change the text. It actually has to go from here to the Zoning and Planning Commission. They'll come back before our committee and then back up here. So just a point of clarification. If the minority report does pass, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be looking at a new ordinance 2 weeks from now. Oh, and one other thing. I actually voted against the pylon sign on that wonderful bank we keep talking about at the corner of West and St. Charles, and I lost that vote 13-1.
Yes, you did. Very, very good, sir. Anybody else for discussion on this? I have a question. So with the minority report, if we had, say, two people looking at a prospective corner, and one was sales, one was a traders and one was a bank. With this, we have the right to say yes or no. But if we don't, if we only have one prospect, in other words, if we have just a bank looking at that corner, and we have the situation of, is it better to have lights on or lights off? That's a decision. So the conditional use is giving us that flexibility. It's not a moratorium, but it's giving us that extra safeguard that we've got last shot at the apple, so to speak. Is that correct, Alderman Healy?
That would be my understanding, yes.
Okay.
Mine as well.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that so we understand the situation. Alderman Rose.
I would disagree. That would not be my understanding of what that would do. We would still have to make a decision based on the 7 criteria, not on an either or. That would be my understanding.
And that's why I want to clarify that, because
I
if this does come down to a close vote, I need to know what our options are, because I am all for retail. I'm all for bringing sales tax in, and banks do pay property taxes, they do employ people, so they have pluses, they're very philanthropic. We've got, as Alderman Healy mentioned, we've got a lot of fine financial institutions that have been very giving to a lot of the nonprofits, et cetera. And quite frankly, a lot of the redevelopment probably wouldn't have happened to Key Corners unless we had the wherewithal from the banks to do that. I think of a board that I sat on for 3 years, which I'm no longer a part of, which is Harris, and I think of that corner up north that was sitting for many years, and I don't think any other company would have been able to come in and take charge of that corner, but they did, and they redeveloped it. So in certain situations, that's why I want to make sure that that's the intent. The intent is to say, okay, if we have a competitive situation, a sales tax generator versus a non-sales tax generator, with in this case the bank, we have the ability to give the nod to the retail store that's going to bring in sales tax. So, and I see the alderman over here cringing, so I want to clarify that because I think we need to make sure that that's clear. Alderman Gutenkopf?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make sure I understood your question, because it wouldn't be up to the city council to decide if a retail establishment or a bank goes in a property. Either property could potentially buy that property. If it was a retail establishment, they don't need to come before us. If it was a bank, they'd buy the property and then come before us and say, this is what we want to build here. So it never would be an either-or situation. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where it would be unless it was a city-owned property and we were soliciting some sort of a business to go in there. It has nothing to, whoever buys that property has the right to build the kind of establishment they want, unless they want to come before us and require us to review the use they need because our code says so. It doesn't mean that they can or can't, or that we have the right to say yes or no. So I can't imagine a scenario where there would be an either-or, that it would be a retail establishment or a non-sales tax generating establishment.
Alderman Morley?
I think the either-or would actually fall to the landlord, or to the owner of the property. So yes, I think the either-or scenario that you lay out could happen, but it's going to happen with commercial building owner Smith or whomever it is. Well, to clarify, that's what I think would happen. I also think that whether we like it or not, out of the 7 conditional uses, I think everyone up here in the committee agrees that conditional use A, the standard A, is the broadest. It really can, just simply not be detrimental to or endanger public health, safety, morals, comfort, general welfare. I could make the argument that Alderman Leader and Alderman Healy's point is directly related to general welfare. Their belief it's general welfare. So whether or not that's the way you should interpret it, that's what we struggle with every meeting, believe me. But that first standard of conditional use is very broad. But to specifically answer your question, Mr. Mayor, that either-or question is going to fall to the owner of the property. And they will have to weigh the fact that if they do want to rent to a bank and this becomes conditional use, there's an additional step that they would have to take.
Okay. Very good. I'll go to Alderman Pezza, and then I'll go to Alderman Healy. Alderman Pezza, you had a question or part of the discussion?
Thank you. No, Mayor DeCiani, I think I understand what the point was you were trying to make, and that's what I'm trying to separate in my mind also. And what's resounding to me, and perhaps it's from attending many zoning commission hearings and meetings, I think we need to keep separate in our mind that if a bank were to come before the zoning commission, and maybe the zoning commission knew somebody else wanted to look at that property or looked at that property also, which is I think what your point was, I'm pretty sure the zoning commission should not use that at all to base their decision. That has no bearing on the criteria they're supposed to use to base their decision. So I think the answer to your question would be no, it shouldn't have a bearing on whether or not somebody we think that might better serve that space, because it's really not part of the equation in coming up with the decision based on what the conditional use says it should be. So I think that's where we need to separate in our minds the fact that just because we think another option would be better, we really can't tell the zoning commission to consider that when they're making a decision whether or not to grant a bank a conditional use. So I don't know if that's how I'm interpreting it.
But ultimately, would we have, they're going to make the recommendation from the commission, it would come to us, would we have then the opportunity to say yes or no here at the council level? Correct?
I would say, but based on what is the question? And I was listening to
Right.
Alderman Rose's, what we should base it on, and it makes sense.
Okay. Alderman Leader.
I would say that the commission is bound by very strict standards. For them, it's almost like the letter of the law. They have to look at the issue narrowly.
Correct.
The Development Planning and Zoning committee has more leeway. Are we influenced by the various conditional uses? Of course we are. But in the end, the reason it goes to the Development Planning and Zoning instead of directly to the City Council from the Zoning and Planning Commission is that we can take into consideration all sorts of things that the commission cannot by law. Then we make a recommendation, and that recommendation goes to the City Council where it's Katie bar the door. You can virtually do what you want up here. This isn't the Supreme Court. You are bound by your conscience to say this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. So we start from strictly letter of the law to an area where there's quite a bit of flexibility in the DP&Z, and finally there's total flexibility here as long as we are acting within the laws of Elmhurst County, the state of Illinois, and the United States.
Very good. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll on the minority report, please.
Leader.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Gudenkauf.
Nay.
Hesse.
No.
Shea.
No.
Rose.
No.
Graham.
No.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York. Abstain. Nybo.
Aye.
Morley.
No.
Kennedy.
Aye.
Mulliner.
No.
Wagner.
Aye.
Okay. Count this real quick. Okay, it looks like 6 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 abstention.
So 6 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 abstention. So that motion fails, correct? Or,
Yes.
Right.
okay. And
Now we go
we
to
will
the majority.
now go to the majority report. And any discussion on that? We had a motion and a second on it, so it's actually still on the floor. And hearing no discussion, I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Morley.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Gudenkauf.
Aye.
Hesse.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Nay.
Graham.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York.
Abstain.
Nybo.
Aye.
Healy.
No.
Kennedy.
Nay.
Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner.
Nay.
8 ayes, 5 nays, 1 abstention.
8 ayes, 5 nays, 1 abstention. The majority report does pass. And on to item number 6. It was very good discussion. I think we heard a lot of pros and cons on this issue with banks. And just so the audience knows and the people watching, even though the minority report did fail, we do have a conditional use on drive-through. So the majority of hopefully these corners that we still have left will have that option, similar to Alderman Healy, but with the drive-through as the conditional use as a fallback. So while the minority report did fail, we still have that in place. So we still have, for those key corners that they're going to have drive-throughs on, we still have somewhat latitude there to keep it retail if at all possible. So, but that's the big question: lights on or versus lights off, especially with this economy too. So those are the decisions that we have to make up here, and hopefully everybody understands that. So, and we do appreciate the banks for all the hard work that they do, the employees that they employ, for the property taxes that they do pay, and for their contribution to society, which we know is big. So, thank you. On to item number 6, which is reports and recommendations of appointed and elected officials. Item number A, letter A, I should say, updates from the mayor. I want to just fill everybody in. On Friday, I met with many of the mayors from both Cook and DuPage County to kind of formalize another resolution, which is a resolution regarding the Western Access, which is option 203D. If you all recall, we actually passed a resolution right before the end of the year, kind of getting everybody, all the municipalities on the same page so that we could look unanimous and 1-4, so to speak, to get this done. Congressman Roskam's office asked that we went ahead and created another resolution, kind of to formalize it. So I met with Mayor Hartwig and Mayor Johnson and Ken Johnson and Craig Johnson from Wooddale and Elk Grove, all the mayors affected in District 1, basically, Mayor Bloomingdale, Mayor of Franklin Park, and North Lake. Everybody was pretty much represented there. So we have all, kind of agreed on wording. I'm going to pass that through committee just to make sure everybody is happy with that. So that will be going into committee for next week. But overall, it was, I think, very positive, and we are naturally looking to get this project done sooner than later. The big question is going to be funding. The project is about $3.6 billion in funding. They're talking it will bring roughly 60 to 70,000 jobs to this region, which is huge for us. And but who's going to pay for it? Who's going to? Are we going to be able to get federal dollars to help this along, et cetera? So those are all things related to this. Also, on March 8th, I, along with many of the mayors, will be meeting with the governor's office to get a letter from the governor directing the state legislator to move this along, and actually direct IDOT to pretty much give this project to the Tollway Authority, which seems to be the most likely player in seeing this project through. So we're looking forward to that, and that was the first item on the agenda that I wanted to mention as far as my report. Second, the prayer issue will be going through to committee next week. I wanted to do this despite having the votes to get this done. I will put this through the process. I want to build consensus, and I would like to see this come out hopefully unanimous. Again, the whole idea behind this is to invite the over 30 churches that are here in our community to participate in a prayer for guidance in the tough decisions that we have coming. The prayers will be non-denominational, with no profession of one faith over any other. And faiths from all residents are represented in our community and are welcome, and almost follow the guidelines that actually our city attorney Storino has put together to make sure that we are doing things the right way. Very similar to what Father Tony did a couple weeks ago. Kept it very much a prayer for guidance. So, and hopefully give us some good wisdom in a lot of these decisions that we need to make. Also wanted to mention that on the legislative front, many people know that I got involved with legislation back in 2008 for autism, and I have actually written 2 more pieces of legislation which are recently introduced in the Illinois legislature. Senate bill, and these are all for people. We have a lot of kids in this community with special needs children, whether it's autism, Down syndrome, CP, you name it. We have a large special needs community in this town. Senate Bill 3106, for those watching that have kids with special ed needs, is a funding bill which would actually remove special ed from the tax cap, something that has been wanting to happen for many, many years. But we've got leadership behind this, and we're hoping that this bill will get out of committee and get to the floor. So we're asking those that are passionate about special needs to call their local senator, call Senator Cronin, call Senator Pankow, and also follow the bill if you can as it goes through committee. There's also a bill called Senate Bill 3111, which is a training bill, which will actually train special ed teachers, special ed teachers' assistants, which in Illinois are not licensed. And so if you have an aide, actually Alderman Pezza has, I believe, a sister-in-law that's the doll of a lady that actually is an aide in my daughter Brianna's school, and she does a great job. But a lot of these aides are not familiarized with the kid situation, so this would actually put a training process in place for teachers' aides. So that's another bill. And actually, Kerry Green from Elmhurst actually was instrumental in bringing that to my attention. And Chris Brettel, who's one of our 205 special ed administrators, actually wrote the bill along with myself, and Joan Drummond, another mom with an autistic child, was very instrumental as well. So we'll be working our tails off to try and get this legislation done. I'll be down in Springfield this week testifying on behalf of the parents, and also trying to bring home some money for our district, which is a couple $1 million in the hole with our state. So I'll be down there lobbying for them as well as the city. So, and lastly, on another note, ECAF had their casino night. I think it was a phenomenal success. We had about almost 400 people show up. I know many of the council was there, and great fundraiser for a great organization that is near and dear to my heart. And it was great to see everybody out and having fun. And that's it. That's it for me. Any other elected officials or reports? Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine actually has something to do with some of the events tonight. I'd just like to make a general recommendation to the full city council. I know this is not part of any ordinance in our MCO, but there's been a variety of reports and tonight an ordinance referred back to committee. For tonight, I think to the previous council meeting. And my general recommendation is during the pulling back to the committee, if the individual or individuals could please give some information on the rationale behind pulling it back to committee. The reason why I request that is because these various issues on our consent agenda are obviously very important for one reason or another, and going into any type of delay, it would be beneficial to the subsequent discussion of that issue if everybody understands the rationale on why it was delayed another 2 weeks. So it's just a very general recommendation if everybody could do that out of respect for their fellow aldermen on the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Brown. Anybody else for reports today from elected officials? All righty. Hearing none, I'd turn it over to City Manager Borcher for the item letter B, overview of the 2010-2011 budget. Take it away, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I need to get the screens down. I've got a very limited PowerPoint to provide an introduction and overview on the operating budget for 2010-11. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Marilyn Gass and Tom Trozine, our finance director and assistant director, that did a yeoman's effort in helping all of staff pull this budget together. All of the department heads participate in this, and actually all of the employees of the city participate in preparing the budget. We announced some time ago that the employees are all now represented by a small group called a Big Ideas Committee that is a group of the employees that meets for the specific purpose of greenlighting, thinking creatively about the budget, about the economy, about our need to reinvent how government in Elmhurst provides services to the community, with the expressed perspective of finding ways to do the job more effectively and less expensively. So all of the employees have been a part of this effort. This effort this year is, I think, one of the longest budgets we've had, 402 pages, not counting the capital expenditure budget. The budget book itself provide a hard copy for the City Council. The City Council has that. We just actually finished the budget document earlier this morning. We got hard copies for the City Council. The electronic version will be available on the city website tomorrow possibly, but no later than Wednesday. We need to scan this thing and then enter it on the city website, where it will be available for the entire community, certainly to review and study as the city council goes through it in the next coming weeks. The good news of the budget is that it is balanced. We've been very aggressive on estimates of the revenues and estimates of expenditures, and have had to significantly throttle the expenditures to match those revenues. A very modest contribution to the fund balance is identified, slightly over $233,000. So that's the good news. It's all about following the mission statement that the community has helped us prepare, which provides our direction in government services, and that is to be responsive and superior with our services, be respectful, and protect and enhance the quality of life of those who not just live here, but also work here, or simply do visit here or conduct business here. I know from working with other managers around the Chicago metro area, every community is incredibly challenged with its budget, and all of these other communities are significantly reducing spending, as Elmhurst must. And in that regard, I think Elmhurst, even in this cutback budget for core and critical services, I think will be still true to our mission statement, but it's appropriate that we keep a focus on that mission statement. Our budget schedule, we're right on schedule. You can see here the operating budget is delivered to the council on March 1st. We will have our public hearing. There's a public hearing required on any budget. That public hearing will be 2 weeks from tonight, embedded within the city council meeting. We would anticipate that the mayor and the committee chairs will collaborate and allow for a committee of the whole meeting to be scheduled next week, to really allow the beginning of the budget review on a section-by-section basis by the city council. Typically, for the committee nights, we have found it effective to schedule a committee of the whole meeting for the budget beginning at 8 p.m., and the committee chairs, working with their committee liaison staff, review the committee agenda and schedule that meeting time for the committee appropriately. If they can get done between 7 and 8, you start at 7. If you only have a short item, 1 or 2, and you want to start your committee meeting at 7:30, you can do that. And on the contrary, if you've got a long committee agenda and need more time, it would be recommended you figure out a way to perhaps start at 6 or 6:30 and kind of work through an evening meal and get ready then for the committee of the whole meeting to go at 8. Again, the good news and bad news of the budget, this past budget cycle has been one of the more extraordinary cycles. In the past, there was on the budget schedule a objective, a mayor council message to the city budget officer, to the city manager, on the goals and objectives to use in preparing the budget. That wasn't possible this year, but we did have, to help the staff prepare the budget, a task force and a series of committee of the whole meetings where the city council sat as a committee of the whole to review those task force recommendations. That discussion with the task force's recommendations as part of it were a serious guide for city staff in preparing the budget. Basically, 2 parameters that applied to the budget prep were provide expenditures that can be supported by existing and reasonably anticipated revenue and revenue enhancements, and stack services, core critical first, and maintain that, and if necessary, everything after that is vulnerable for cuts. In that regard, again, the budget is prepared. We're maintaining core critical services. There's a lot of cuts in the budget. And although we do have a modest contribution to fund balance, the fund balances remain well under what the council's policy has been in the past relative to a working cash fund of about $1 million and a 3 to 4 months fund balance in the general fund balance. Working cash fund is spent down. The general fund balance is well under the limit. So the budget had to be prepared without those resources that have been used in the past to help balance the budget. The reason all of the governments across the land are in trouble is revenues and the economy. It's not news to you. You've been working with the staff, those of you who were just elected, since you were elected, and those that were here before, over the last year's budget, where there were significant cuts in the budget. This is the overview of the general fund, just the general fund's revenues, where you see the 9-10 prepared estimate of those revenues versus now the prepared estimated for the budget prep, and now 9 months, 10 months into the fiscal year, revised estimates and the variance. Any budget is an estimate of spending and an estimate of revenues. Frankly, our estimate of spending has been pretty accurate over the years, frankly, because on the spending side, there is much more control. You spend in a fashion to be spending less than what you've budgeted so that you can maintain that budget. On the revenue side, the City Council has some control over rates, has control over a tax levy, but on many of these other revenues, the City Council doesn't have any control. So it's not the council's fault. A lot of these, most of these are economy driven. These revenues are just way down. The task force, when they completed their report, you recall their report and their recommendations came to the City Council late summertime. Late summertime, the economy was tanking significantly at that point. Staff had prepared revised estimates of revenues. Those revised estimates of revenues were provided to the task force and to the council. At that time, the revised revenue drops were such that we anticipated that the real revenues for the 9-10 fiscal year would be about $2 million less than what was estimated. You can see before you now, those much more accurate because we've got real numbers for most of the year. We certainly don't have March and April, but we've got a good understanding of everything through January and a little bit of how February is looking. Those revised estimates show that we'll be, as a community with the general fund's revenues, $4 million under what was estimated for the budget year. It's a revenue issue, really not a spending control issue. So to make it work, again, there's no longer a working cash fund or a general fund. We've got to reduce spending to match. The only other place to look at was the capital improvement fund. As we did our first drafts of the budget without looking at changing the capital improvement fund, we were significantly in the red still, or significantly needing to get after core and critical services. It was a staff decision, which now the city manager is presenting to you, the city council, for your consideration and for your discussion and ultimately your approval of a policy. But it's our staff recommendation that rather than maintain a very strict definition of capital improvement fund expenditures, that for this very difficult year, this very difficult time frame, to allow our core critical services to not be affected, we are recommending that these areas of spending be financed with capital improvement fund dollars as opposed to general fund revenues. Street resurfacing is maintenance, concrete patching is patching, tree purchases and planting is kind of capital if you think about the tree, but kind of like maintenance, and certainly contingency is not a capital expenditure. But we are recommending through the budget document that these expenditures be allowed to be financed from the capital improvement fund, to therefore allow critical and core services not to be affected, and in the balancing act then allow a slight contribution to go to the fund balance. What this did, however, is trickle-down effect. The trickle-down effect was that the capital expenditure budget didn't have these dollars for capital items, and we need to defer significant capital spending to allow these other, from a city staff perspective, higher ranked critical core services to be financed. Recall the council's policy on the use of state income tax dollars is 80% for capital spending, 20% for the general fund. With these near $1 million of capital improvement fund dollars being directed towards general fund type expenditures, if you ultimately approve that, for this 10-11 fiscal year, that state income tax dollars are really more like a 50-50 split between capital and general fund spending. This then results in this chart of expenditures as it relates to then the fund balance. The fund balance, as a result of the economy and the revenue drops, our fund balance is dropped down significantly for the last several years. We're projecting with this next fiscal year a slight increase. See the slight increase in the general fund balance, and absent some rebounding of revenues or some expenditure that would go away, the fund balance begins to drop again. So we got to really work hard on revenues and on what are the services that are most important, most significant, closest to the core and critical that we're going to maintain. We've got, from a staff perspective, some reservations about the budget. As I stated earlier, although we are very aggressive in our ability to control spending and deliver expenditures at less than what is authorized in the budget document, on the revenue side, we've got less control. Therefore, with this very, very tight, balanced budget, we're concerned again about the revenue estimates. We'll get into those revenue estimates. You'll understand what those estimates are and help us ratchet them up or ratchet them down. We're on sales tax and income tax, basically with the precipitous drops that we've seen over the last 2 years, and hearing that the economy is beginning to turn around, we're estimating that those dollars will stay flat for the next fiscal year. If they continue to erode, we haven't done enough in expenditure reductions. The next bullet, state of Illinois, we hear legislators at the state level saying that the state's got bigger problems in the cities and villages, and the local governmental distribution fund of distributing income taxes that is currently providing 10% to go to cities and villages, maybe should go down to to less than that. Help the state out. If that happens, our budget is out of whack again. The capital bill provides for $450,000 from the capital bill, which was approved by the State General Assembly, $450,000 to come to the city. The city hasn't seen that $450,000 check. We're counting on it. That $450,000 is in the budget. Again, if that doesn't come, the budget's not balanced. The council has been a significant part of identifying some new revenue sources. To your credit, staff's credit, actually the administrative tows was a suggestion that we give some credit to our Big Ideas Committee, as well as even the wireless alarm program, where employees and then department managers and department heads began looking at it, and ultimately then committee of the council got involved. Council passed ordinances, and we're anticipating from administrative tows an additional revenue stream, about $300,000 there. Wireless alarm program, not completely innovative. A few cities did it before Elmhurst, but Elmhurst is still on the leading edge of communities that have implemented a wireless alarm program that provides for cheaper fees for the businesses and revenue to the city. We anticipate about $200,000 of wireless alarm revenue coming to the city, while we're also paying off the principal and interest on the capital cost for that. We are anticipating a motor fuel tax. I know it was removed from the budget, or removed from the agenda earlier this evening. City staff budget, as prepared for your consideration, is anticipating that $250,000, which was the majority report of the committee, identifying $0.015. We didn't identify what the task force recommended, but we did identify what the Finance Committee draft report suggests. So there's $250,000 estimated of new revenue to support this budget from motor fuel tax. Also on the right side, rubbish, parking, utility, the city revenue side has identified that the expenses associated with trash collection are such that there's a recommendation that the fees be adjusted modestly, 55 cents a month for the 33-gallon containers, 80 cents for the big toters. That will result in a little over $100,000 in new revenue, and for the yard waste, or no change on yard waste sticker, but for the garbage sticker, 25-cent change for that sticker, an additional $15,000 or so revenue there. If that recommendation of the staff to the committee, to the council, is not implemented, there's a hole in the budget. Parking fees, we're recommending that the earlier recommendation to $2 be implemented as soon as Metra identifies their perspective on that. And utility fees, the DuPage Water Commission is passing on a 20% increase on their water rates. The city staff has identified the needs of the sewer and the water areas of the utility fund, and is recommending a 15% increase, less than the DuPage Water Commission increase, but a 15% increase on city water and sewer use. That won't affect the general fund, but does affect the utility fund. Then there's the grants, the American Recovery and I think it's Resource Act. A lot of those dollars have been targeted to Elmhurst's credit. Elmhurst staff, council, mayor aggressively pursued these grants. We've been identified with 6 potential projects that would receive grant dollars. We're counting on those grant dollars to come in, or again, there's trouble. We've had 3 terrible years in a row, snow and ice expenditures. We're estimating, certainly, again, going into the next year, we're vulnerable to the weather in that regard. A more significant vulnerability, I think, is in our labor negotiations. We've got 3 union which provide critical services: police, fire, public works. Those 3 union contracts have got to be worked with in our labor management collaboration. The city is not in a sole control situation with labor negotiations, so there's some vulnerability there. And then lastly, the Metro grant, $2.5 million on the Metro grant. Great work to get that grant. Absent that $2.5 million actually coming to the city, the capital improvement fund is in trouble to the tune of $2.5 million. We're counting on that grant. And then all of the repair and replacements and capital items that are deferred have the risk associated that if it's a piece of equipment and it fails, we're going to now have a maintenance expense that will not be part of the budget. So we're a bit vulnerable with all of the deferrals. The budget cuts themselves are separate tab in the budget book. They're on page 401 and 402. I tried to lay those all out so you can understand all of the cuts that have been applied to the budget. That's the overview. I didn't want to read anything. Certainly the council and the community can go through the budget summary. There's a budget summary that says what I just said in a written version. Review the overview, get into the budget. We'll crack the book open next week if that schedule is acceptable to the mayor and to the committee chairs. Probably at 8 o'clock, committee of the whole meeting, we'll begin working on that budget document. And then at our formal council meetings, the first and third Mondays, we finish at the end of the council meeting with a workshop going back into the budget document. Mr. Mayor, I'll entertain certainly any questions at this time, but didn't intend to get into specifics too much this evening. Just wanted to do an overview for you all.
Thank you, City Manager Borchert. Any questions or discussion for City Manager Borchert on the budget? Naturally, we'll have a lot of time to look at this, but Alderman Rose, I see you got a hand up over there.
Yeah, I did a cursory glance at these budget reductions. Can you give us an idea next week when we start this, what percentage of each one of these budgets these cuts represent? I mean, from here it looks like police are taking a huge hit. You know, I mean, Public Works rather is taking a huge hit, but they've got a big budget too. So,
yeah,
can you give us some idea next? I mean, you don't have to do it now, but next week, what percentage of their total budget these cuts are going to represent?
I think we could certainly break that out. It was core critical first, and police and fire have got an advantage. They're more core and critical than anything else. But every department has got reductions.
Any other questions or discussion on Mr. Borchert? Got a lot of information to go over, and as Mr. Borchert mentioned, next week we're going to do a committee of the whole, I believe, for the, is it going to be for next week? Okay.
Committees at 6:30 or 7, and then committee of the whole at 8.
Okay. So, committee 6:30, 7 o'clock, committee of the whole around 8 o'clock. We'll be delving into this, and we'll have time to go through the budget page by page, and challenging times, we'll do the best we can to deliver services, and we appreciate staff in giving us recommendations how we could keep this budget balanced. So, Alderman Healy.
Just one quick question specific to the budget. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right page and the right information. The budget for the year we're currently in, according to page 15, was just under $130 million. Estimated expenses are $121 million. Am I reading that correctly?
Share the page.
page 15. So the budget was just shy of 130 million. Looks like we're going to come in at 121 million in expense. And then the proposed budget that we just received is just a little bit under 119 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we budgeted less than we're going to spend estimated this year.
And I would say those are all of the funds, a lot of that's capital, a lot of it's,
But the total budget, I know there's a lot of
Right.
moving parts, but the total budget is, we're budgeting less to spend next year than we actually spent this year.
that's correct.
Thank you.
All righty. Anybody else? Okay. I will now go on to item number 7, which is other business. At this time, is there any other business that anybody would like to bring up at this time? Any other business? Hearing none, I go on to item 8, announcements. Anybody for announcements? Alderman Morley.
Just real quick, it was kind of lost in our consent agenda tonight, but I wanted to thank Chief Kopp for all of his hard work. He's been doing dual duty, and tonight we made it official, and we removed the acting from his title. So I just wanted to thank him for his hard work.
Good. Absolutely. Welcome aboard, Chief Cap back there, Assistant City Manager. All right, any other announcements? All righty. Hearing no announcements, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Alderman Morley, Alderman Gutenkopf, all in favor by voice vote, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.